Okay, good evening. Hello and welcome. I'm going to get started here in a couple of minutes, or I'll get started right now. And feel free to revisit the food tables in the back. There's lots of food to be eaten, so help yourself. I know it's midterm time for those students. Please fill up and eat your fill. So thanks for joining us tonight for the Barger Leadership Institute Speaker Series, our very first one, featuring our speakers, Eileen Spring, President and CEO of Food Gatherers, and Paul Saginaw, founding partner and co-owner of Zingerman's Community of Businesses, and also co-founder of Food Gatherers. I'm Mary Schlitt. I'm the Assistant Director for the Barger Leadership Institute. And the Barger Leadership Institute is a student-powered, faculty-guided community dedicated to leadership, learning, and practice. Several of our students are here this evening helping us out with the event. Our programming is open to any undergraduate at any point in their career at the University of Michigan. Sorry, I'm recovering from a cold. After taking our required mini course, the Leadership Lab, students are free to progress through each phase of our leadership programming and activities at their own pace. So this quote is from Dave Barger. He's the founder of the BLI and also former CEO of JetBlue Airways. He said, "Leadership is the frontline connectivity. It's about being plugged into the customer, the culture, the government, and being visionary." Tonight, we have the pleasure of hearing from two local leaders, or better yet, visionaries, who through deep connections to community, clients, partners, and employees have shaped the culture and the success of Food Gatherers and Zingerman's. I know this for a fact because I've had the privilege of serving under Eileen as CEO and then also Paul, who's on the board of directors of Food Gatherers, in my time there as Chief Development Officer. And I can personally attest that on a regular basis, I observed their integrity, their compassion, and their determination of these two people. Every action, every decision was made in the service of the greater vision and values of their organization. They inspired me to be a better leader. So in most stories of individual leadership development, there's a moment when someone, a mentor, a boss, a friend, opens a door. For Eileen, the door to Food Gatherers was opened by Paul Saginaw in 1994 when he asked her to be CEO. In her reign as Carrot Queen, and I can call her Carrot Queen because the Food Gatherers logo has a giant carrot on it on every single vehicle that travels through town, so we love our carrots at Food Gatherers. Eileen has led 3 capital campaigns and stewarded a community-wide food security plan that dramatically improved the amount of fresh produce and protein available to individuals struggling with food insecurity. She's a founding member of the Washtenaw Housing Alliance, an active board member for FEMA, and she's received her bachelor's degree from Hofstra University and her master's degree from the University of Michigan. She leads a staff of 30 people and over 7,000 volunteers to distribute more than 6 million pounds of food to food insecure people in Washtenaw County.
Just before Thanksgiving in 1988, Paul Saginaw and a handful of Zingerman staff borrowed a van. They loaded up the van with surplus food from restaurants and grocery stores and quickly distributed it to St. Andrews in Ann Arbor and Brown Chapel in Ypsilanti. This simple act of connecting those who have more than enough food to those who have too little food would grow into Michigan's first food rescue program. Zingerman's nurtured Food Gatherers and gave us our own set of wheels, continuous support, and a healthy dose of chutzpah. Food Gatherers soon became an independent nonprofit and embarked on a journey to engage every food business, every public institution, and every single one of our community members in fighting hunger where we live.
Food Gatherers started as a program to supplement existing federal programs. As the federal safety net dwindled, Food Gatherers very strategically and very agilely adapted to meet the need in the community. The 2009 Great Recession created huge numbers of people who were food insecure. It was at that point that Food Gatherers really grew and adapted, again, to create this safety net system.
When Food Gatherers became the real food bank of this community, that allowed us to be able to decrease the amount of money that we would spend at regular grocery stores and to be able to save money, which then would allow us to serve more people. It's taking that pressure off our back that we have one central source that we can come to, and it helps to supplement, in the case of Peace Neighborhood Center, about 50% of our annual food costs. That explosion, that great explosion of being a food bank and food rescue, all combined, was extraordinary for us and for this community.
For many years, Food Gatherers measured our success by the pounds of food we distributed. We learned from the people we were serving and began to connect the dots between hunger and health. Not just more pounds, but more nutritious and more economically valuable food was needed. We began to invest in our capacity and the capacity of our partner agencies to distribute more vegetables, more fruit, and more protein.
Food Gather supplies Hope with a lot of different kinds of food for our different programs. Their truck comes 3 to 4 times a week. Almost every day that we're open, they're here delivering for a different program. We look forward to seeing the truck come. It's big and it's orange, and the people come out and they have big smiles, and they're just super friendly, they're efficient, they're helpful. We did something with them that was called the Food Pantry Conversion Project, and we made it so there were more healthy items available or more prominently displayed, and they helped us purchase a large refrigeration cooler for more dairy products and more low-fat dairy products.
If we didn't have food gatherers, we'd probably have to limit the amount of times that people can come to our food pantry each month. We would have to limit the amount of food that we're allowed to hand out, and it would probably only be able to be a lot of processed foods, which are high in sodium and can have negative impacts on people's health. We get 95% of our food from food gatherers.
When we look at the statistics, I believe close to 15% of the residents have food insecurity at some point in their life. That number is even heightened when you look at young moms. And at Corner Health Center, over 50% of our patients and our clients are young moms or expecting moms. The work that Food Gatherers does, not only with Corner Health Center, but with other agencies, allows those who otherwise wouldn't have access to fresh produce and food. It actually gives them that opportunity to come to our pantry or visit another pantry.
This is a short video about food gatherers, and now on to Paul Saginaw. Paul Saginaw and Ari Weinswig joined forces to found Zingerman's Deli and open the doors on March 15, 1982. All they wanted at the time was a really great corned beef sandwich and an organization with soul. Zingerman started as 1,300 square feet of combined restaurant and specialty food retail space. And in those early days, it was run primarily by Paul, Ari, and 2 employees. The Zingerman's community of businesses now has 23 partners, employs over 750 people, and generates over $60 million in annual sales from 10 separate businesses. Paul is a graduate of the University of Michigan after a 7-year undergraduate career and believes that he has been successful in spite of the fact that he has limited natural talent and abilities, because he has always thought that the only real limits are those of vision.
Business shouldn't exist in order to create wealth. It should exist in order to give people better lives. So Ari and I opened the Zingerman's Delicatessen in March of 1982, and we were right. The people wanted a really good sandwich. When we first started, we wanted to be unique. For us, by definition, that meant there's only one of you. We were never going to grow by replication. We would never open up a franchise or have a chain of company-owned delicatessens. Things were going really well for the first 10 years. And about 10 years into it, I started to notice things in the environment that were troubling to me. There didn't seem to be the same joie de vivre. We were this small business in this little building, and we were busting out at the seams, and the management slots were filled, and we were young. We weren't dropping dead left and right. So if you were up and coming and you wanted to grow financially and you wanted to grow professionally, there was now a ceiling there. How are we going to grow and stay true to that vision that we would never expand by replicating. So one day I drag Ari outside and sit him down on that bench in front of the deli, and I said, okay, we've been at this for 10 years. 10 years from now, what do we look like? So what we wanted to do in order to grow is we wanted to provide the opportunity to ownership in the brand to the people that work for us. So if you were entrepreneurial and you had passion for a given product or service, and you came out with a compelling business plan, and you were willing to invest at some level that was meaningful to you, you're in the game with us. This is ownership. This isn't phantom stock. You are my partner. You are my peer. And we would be customers and suppliers of each other. People come and they're interested, and you start talking to them, and then they immediately go to, well, we're going to do this, and then we're going to scale up and, have this liquid event. And I go, okay, well, that's really the opposite of what we do. So if we're scaling up, which we do, we scale up by allowing employees to come and have ownership in the brand. There's now 8 separate businesses that are run by 16 partners, and every one of those partners started as an employee here. I wanted the people that work for us to be able to afford to live into the community, to raise families, to send kids to school. And everything was going to be in the Ann Arbor area. We felt deeply rooted in the community, and we didn't want to be traveling to some city because, the coleslaw wasn't up to par. Without articulating it, I think we both had a concept in our head that there's this idea of having enough. So when you believe that, when you're not wanting more and more all the time, what's driving you is wanting to create something of excellence. It's liberating. What is this? Is this capitalism? Is this socialism? What do we have here? I don't know if it's capitalism. I know it's not socialism. I don't know what ism it is. Anybody can do it. It's just a lot of work, but I would say try it. It's also fun.
It is fun. So the shared focus of all BLI programming is the BLI 10 leadership habits. These habits are integrated into all parts of our curriculum at the BLI, and they're a signal to our students that effective leadership takes learning, work, and practice. Tonight, we'll use a few of these habits to shape our conversation with Eileen and Paul, who will now join me on the stage with our evening's moderator, Ram Mahalingam, director of the BLI, professor of psychology, and director of the Mindful Connections Lab. Please join me in welcoming them.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
These lights are bright.
Welcome, everyone. This is our first speaker series. So, Mary and I want to thank all my staff. They did a wonderful job of putting things together, and we have 2 inspiring speakers to be here. So, instead of giving a talk, we thought we'll start with the conversation, then we can open the floor for other people to continue the conversation. That'll be okay?
Absolutely.
Okay. I think one of the things important to BLI is values. We talk about how students have to be connected to the values. This is important. How have your values shaped your leadership journey, which is important for us to know. It'll be interesting for the students to learn about that.
I'll let you start.
And I thought you were starting.
Well, I'm happy to start. Thank you. It's nice to be here, and I appreciate the orange chairs since that's our logo. It's a little hard for me since Paul is my mentor to share the stage with him in this way, since I've learned so much from him. And I would just start by, in terms of my values, I think it begins really with my parents, and my parents were both from Ireland and were very Catholic and had no resources, came over separately, met in New York City at a dance, but came over from Ireland with nothing really besides the phone number of a cousin and a couple dollars, and And so when I think about what I learned from them, and they had worked their lives in the hospitality industry, in restaurants as waiters and waitresses and bartenders and such. And so I learned a lot about hard work, and I think, and servant leadership. I think there's no better way to understand what servant leadership is than serving people. And I think you learn that in the food industry. And it was funny for me to then go to college and then back up in the food industry, because I think that was not my parents' goal for me. But I also learned a lot about integrity, I think, and just those are, I think, are the strongest values. And I tell a story sometimes to my friends and staff. When I was a young kid, I was like 12 or so, and hanging out with a bunch of other young kids doing nothing on a sidewalk in town, my little town, and I found this wad of cash, and it was like $250, and that was a lot of money in 1976 or whatever it was, and I turned it into the bank. We didn't know what to do, but we had to spend. Should we just spend it all? And so it turned out that the owner of the liquor store in town had dropped this wad of money. And he gave me an award, for finding it, probably $25 or so. But he was kind of a drunk, and so for years, like every year that when I would ever run into him, he would give me $25 more for having turned in this money a long time ago. So I tell that story because it does come back to you, and I do think that. That in running any organization, particularly a food-based one and a nonprofit, that it is a lot of resiliency that you need, and also the integrity is important. Trust is the biggest asset that a community organization has, and it's probably true of any organization. But you have to earn it every day, but it's very fragile. It could be lost in like a moment, and so to have your decisions based in that, and to have that bank, if you will, of trust in your integrity can really guide you through really complex, difficult situations where you don't really know the answer.
Paul?
I would say for myself, it also goes back to when I was very young. I was fortunate that I had four grandparents in my life for a long time. And my mother's father, Ben Sherman, was a small businessman, and I would go to work for him in the summer. And he was an amazing person. He was born in this country, which was unusual. Most of the relatives had come over of that generation, but he just he sponsored many relatives to come over from Europe, and he sponsored a lot of people that I grew up thinking they were my aunts and my uncles and my cousins, but they were no relation at all. It's just that he had sponsored to get them over here. And he was, I would spend a lot of time with him, and he believed, what he used to tell me was, half of what you have belongs to those who need it. And he really lived his life that way. He also said, don't shit on the rungs as you climb the ladder of success. They're the same ones you're coming down on. Which was, I think, more poetic way of saying don't burn bridges. But so I grew up with his influence very heavy. Also, when I was 13 years old, and I was I think either a Cub Scout or a Boy Scout, maybe a Boy Scout by that time. And when you're a Boy Scout, you get this magazine called Boy's Life, and in the back of it was an ad for a mini bike, Little Indian mini bike kit that you'd have to build. And I thought, oh, my dad's very, handy, and he wants to see me be, he'd love for me to be constructive. And so I went to him and I said, will you buy this for me? And he said, are you crazy? I work hard for my money. If you want, something like that, go out and earn some money. And so I did. I went out and I got a job on a landscaping crew. This was, you didn't have OSHA and you didn't have a lot of things you could. Here I was, 13 operating, power equipment. But a couple things. One was that the man that I was working for was a real hustler. He was working at Ford on a midnight shift, and then he would run this landscaping crew. And he was, I guess, when I look back, maybe he was bipolar, because sometimes he was just this great person to be around, and then other times he was very difficult to be with, and he had this effect. So when he was coming in, he was in a good mood. The whole crew, everything was swinging, and everybody was having a good time. And then when he was turning into the other person, everybody's bickering with each other. And so I learned that that when you're the leader, everybody is watching all of your moves all the time, and with everything you do, you're sending tacit messages out, what is okay, what isn't okay. And that was certainly something that I brought with me as I started to be in groups and open businesses, always trying to be aware that you're, if you want a great organization, then you're going to have to behave in a way every single day that you want everybody to behaving, sending that message out. So those were some of the early lessons that I had. Also, in relation to food gatherers, so my grandfather's store, he had a business where they purchased used and surplus ball bearings, and then they would recondition them. And so a bearing that might have been a high-speed bearing was now going to be, a slow-moving one on a conveyor belt. And we were in a pretty rough neighborhood in Detroit. And then right next door, kind of around the corner, was Joe's Bar and Grill. And so people would come in through the back factory. It's a little building, like a little tool and die shop, or come in through the front, and they'd ask for money. In those days, they were referred to as winos. Now, those are homeless people. And asking for money, and he'd say, go next door, and tell him to put it on Mr. Sherman's bill and have a meal. And so one day we're in there eating, and this is now this is the in the 60s, and I'm reading Ramparts magazine, and there's Haight-Ashbury, and it's open it up or shut it down, and I was saying you think you're doing something, changing something, but everything's all messed up. And then one of the men that had been sitting at the bar eating came by and said, thank you, Mr. Sherman. And he said, well, I think I made a difference to that person. Sometimes I think that was like the kind of the kernel of an idea that helped start food gatherers.
Thank you. I think you talked about both our values. How families play a very important role in your values. Now I just want to see what are the personal strengths you have to cultivate to get where you are now.
It's funny because I could think of all the deficits I had to overcome more easily, which says a lot about me, I suppose. It's personal strengths. I think I've always been interested in words and language, and I think that has served me well, and I'll give a shout out to LS&A students. And when I hire people now, and in certain ways, my work would have been served well if I had an MSW or an MPH, but I don't. That was not my background. I actually have a master's in American culture. But I think, when I hire folks, that I think, if you know how to read and know how to not just understand what people are saying, but read between the lines and connect the dots, and then learn how to communicate to different audiences in an effective way, And that's not being manipulative, it's understanding what folks need, you know, how to communicate isn't, it's not like a deceitful thing, it's about understanding where folks are coming from and what are the words and the language that they use that you're going to have the biggest impact and the quickest impact. And I think that has served me well in everything that I've done. And I think I have also an innate, I keep looking at Mary, I'm like, help me, Mary, because it's easier with people you work with, but I'm not one to rest on my laurels. I wouldn't say that I'm a pessimist, but you know, when people always say like, is the glass half full or half empty? And I'm like, well, it could be full, but it could break at any moment, you know, or the water, you could spill it.
Where's the glass? I don't see it.
Yeah, so I'm just like always on to kind of like, yes, we did this, but now we have to go here, you know. So maybe it's an impatience, but also just a, you know, kind of a gung-ho, keep going. You know, if you have done this and we need to do this, and that's been that's been a joy at Food Gatherers, really, to be able to be part of different levels of growth and to you know, to touch more people's lives.
Paul?
I think that if you're in trying to be a good leader and lead an organization or lead a movement or lead an event, requires I think I was able to develop what I would call a character, which to me it's the ability to keep going and persevere long after the romance of having made this decision subsides, which often is, you know, right after, you know, you get together for a strategic retreat and you're, you know, you come up with these great ideas and everybody's high-fiving and button chests, and then as soon as you leave the room, you know, the energy starts to dissipate and you go back to work, and actually doing the work to achieve what you've set out to do it can be drudgery, and you know, and it requires really pushing through it. To me, it's like you're an elephant on roller skates on the beach, and you're trying to move along, and everybody is going, you know, why are we doing this? It was so much better than before, and for me, it was, you know, steeling myself to have the ability to keep pointing to the vision and saying, well, look, we agreed we were going to do this. We agreed that would be a beautiful future. We agreed that that's how we're going to define success, and we're going to stay the course, because in my experience, anything worth doing, anything of significance, at somewhere along the timeline from where you've hatched this idea and where you can measure it, and, you know, by all metrics, you've been successful, you're popping the champagne, somewhere along here it's going to look like a total failure, and that's when you really you have to stay with it and keep going. You know, it's still a great idea, so let's just keep going. So that was one. Another is a big growth for me was to become a better listener, and to become a compassionate listener, and to try to listen from a place of love when I'm talking or, you know, dealing with someone that I just want to choke, but just you know, really trying to understand first, and then to make myself understood. Learning to, when furious, to get curious and ask, just keep asking questions. So those were that was where I think I've, you know, made strides, where things got easier.
I particularly want to follow up on this question, like how you develop a deep listening skill, especially when you're dealing with someone you don't agree with, correct? So what was the challenge, and how did you do specifically something
You know, I can remember a very, very specific time when we were open at the Delicatessen, had been open for a while. We hadn't opened any other businesses yet, but we had a formal leadership team, and we would have a management meeting, and they sucked. You know, it just wasn't working, and so we're having a meeting. I said, folks, I just want this to be a better meeting. I want us to be excited to come to it. I want us to be able to do real work in it and come up with innovative solutions. And one of the managers said, well, you're the problem. And that, you are, when I can propose something and you're sarcastic and you cut me down, and you shut me down, and I'm not gonna, I'm not bringing anything up again. You're terrible to work with. You're the problem. And I was like, whoa. And I thought about it, and I realized I spend a lot of time apologizing to people for kind of being sarcastic and biting, and I understood that somebody would say something, and I would, I'd have a visceral response, and I'd be ready to react in a way that was way out of proportion to any perceived slight. And I thought, okay, I'm dealing with my father, or and so I would do this. I'd sit on my hands in the meeting, and when somebody would say something and I would feel myself, kind of start to flush, I'd try to go outside my body and sit on my shoulder and say, okay, what's really going on? You don't have to react to this. And that was a real moment in time, because I was crushed. I thought I was this great boss and that well-liked, and that was what I wanted to be. And somebody, God bless them, pointed out to me that I wasn't. And so I worked hard from that point on.
Thank you. I think one of the things students always see very successful leaders, they don't really see the steps they took, the several failures they had to reach where they are. Can you speak some of your failures that were instrumental in the development of your leadership style?
Wow. Do we have like 10 hours? Or I don't. Some of the failures. When you're employing people, you can kind of divide folks up. There's people that are really high performers and in a high agreement with your culture, right? And then there's people that are they're low performers and low agreement with your culture. Okay, so either of those are real easy to deal with, right? Great performer, high agreement. You're going to continue to promote, give more responsibility. Low performance, low agreement, thank you and goodbye. And then there's high agreement but low performance. Okay, they're more training, they're in the wrong position. And then there's the high performer that is not in line with the culture at all. They could be a real rainmaker in the organization. They're your top salesperson, or they're a whiz at whatever it is they're doing, but they're always causing drama within the organization, and they're the most difficult to deal with. And the thought of having that confrontation and asking that person to exit was, didn't sound good. And what happens is you start to lose good people because of that. And then it's too late, and I realize I'm out of integrity with the organization. at that point. We have a set of guiding principles. They're written. We teach them, and they're important in a couple areas, but they define the levels of excellence that you're striving for. They define the culture or the personality of the organization. How are we going to relate to each other, to our customers, to our suppliers, to the media, and if they're well written and you're and they're taught and you stick to them, it's the same as if you stand in front of the whole organization and you say, I promise you that this will be the reality within this organization without exception. And then if you keep that promise, then you have this amazing asset. You're going to have the trust of the people that work for you. And if you do, then you can be extraordinary. You can accomplish great things. You can have an enormous amount of joy doing it. If you don't keep that promise, you squander that capital, you lose that trust, you're like every other kind of so-so middling organization, around. And so when you allow someone, just because they're a rainmaker, just because they can really deliver, to do that, then you're out of integrity with the organization. And I would say that I failed more times at that, acting more quickly than I would care to admit to.
Yeah, well, Paul, I think, dealing with personnel issues, and in our case, the Food Gathers, both staff and as volunteers, we have 7,000 volunteers, and many of them function as staff. But obviously, it's a different role. But one thing Paul said to me a long time ago, when I was seeking advice about management, he's like, people show you what they got at the beginning. And if you're not listening and noticing that, it's going to bite you in the ass. And it's definitely always been true that, really within the first 3 months or so, you see what people bring. And I think a lot of times, particularly in social service agencies and such, where, the ethic is about being really nice and welcoming and, everyone's great. And it's hard to pay attention and to be on someone and to say, that's not so good. And so learning how to spot that and to not let it just fester, because and sometimes I have and sometimes I haven't, and it always bites you in the ass down the road. But so, and Zingerman's has been really good. Zing Train, is one of the arms of the organization that has sort of codified some of the principles and training and such. That's very helpful, and I think it really does come back to training, but also you also sometimes have to be ready to, and this is the hardest thing, acknowledge conflict, deal with the things you don't want to deal with, that you want to turn the cheek on, even in any relationship. And try to confront it early on before it does have damage to the organization. And that's, something I have to remind myself of all the time, because it's easier to just be like, okay, we'll just turn, it's not really in flames, so we're not going to put out that fire. But, to be able to confront stuff and have difficult conversations, I think is you have to do it, or else it does have it poisons the culture in the organization. And I think I've learned that lesson the hard way. And another way to think of it too is that it's a slightly different issue, but efficiency, like we're always talking about being efficient, and sometimes being efficient isn't the same as effective, right? And that I think there's a quote, something like, efficiency is doing the thing right, effectiveness is doing the right thing. And sometimes in a day-to-day operation where you're really focused on the outputs, that you have to really sometimes, have that framework, and it leads to different decisions when you do that. And this is a very innocuous example, but I think most people get partly what we do at Food Gatherers is we pick up food from surplus food from area businesses. and redistribute it to a network of partner agencies. And we're always getting help from folks to be like lean management and come in and do logistics stuff and do this. And so one of these really smart, probably U of M consultants, student group said, well, we looked at your routes and it would be much more effective or much more efficient if your drivers, who at that time were mainly volunteers, but now have since evolved, but it'd be much better if you divided up picking up food from delivering food, meaning we would just go to food donors, come back to the warehouse, sort the food, and then there'd be a different route that would go out and distribute the food. And it makes sense, and they were right when they looked at sort of the tasks involved and also the mileage. And so we started to do that, and then people were disgruntled, and volunteers started to drop off a little bit, and realized that for the person in the truck, it was so meaningful to them to distribute the food to someone in need. And so eliminating that piece of it, all at some level was more efficient. It really wasn't, right, when you lost your labor source. And so the motivation for folks to work there and volunteer there, we really had to think of both those elements, that it isn't just about moving widgets, but it's connecting to people's hearts in a way. And the only way to do that was when they saw people that they were helping. And it was a great lesson to learn.
Yeah, you know what they left out? So, that like lean manufacturing techniques and continuous improvement, that would, when you first look at it, would tell you to do it that way.
Right.
But then unless there's a value added, to that activity, and clearly they weren't aware of the value that was added on that activity.
I think it goes to the next question about connectedness. How have you worked to promote connectedness to further the values and work of your respective organizations? Paul, you want to go?
So I work with a lot with the managers a lot, and the new partners, and I explain that their role is not to be an expert problem solver or a technical or functional expert. Their main charge is the growth and development of the people that work for them, and that's where their focus should be. How are they going to serve those people that are under their charge? We practice what's called servant leadership that we learned from Robert Greenleaf, which kind of came out of the church, but has been applied in all, in many different ways now. And that, that's is focusing on the growth and development of the people that work for us. We believe that everybody who comes in has some of the ingredients necessary to be successful, and it's our job is to help them identify what their motives are and to encourage them to take action on those. And if we're focusing on that, we're going to be in good shape. And that we also, we endeavor to provide an extremely high level of service. And when we talk about service, it's not just service to our customers, but to each other within the organization and to the larger community. So that our goal is that anybody that comes in contact with us, whether as a customer or applying for a job or asking for a donation or over the phone or over the website, is that they're going to leave that interaction with the perception that we exist to be of service, and that we view ourselves as stewards in the community, and that if we're doing our job well, then we're going to, it should be better off because we existed, and really driving that home in everything that we do. So, part of our mission is that we're going to provide this Zingerman experience, and we're going to show love and care in all our actions. And so, what to us that means, we always want to be aware of what are the impact intended and unintended of the decisions we make going to be, and so be very careful about that.
Eileen?
Connectedness. Well, lucky for us, I think food is a great connector, and our work inherently at Food Gatherers is connecting those who have too much with those who have too little, and looking at our sort of stakeholders. It's food donors, it's volunteers, it's community agencies, and ultimately it's the people we seek to serve who are food insecure. And so really, like, that's what we are, is connecting every day. And I think I've always, I've been involved in nonprofits in my entire career, and I always liked the combination of not just thinking about policy or, not just fundraising, but having the direct service. And so it really is built in to our practice. It's so in a way it's easier, and Paul and I have joked over the years when, since we were started from Zingerman's. I've never worked at Zingerman's, but some of the values of Zingerman's really, are easier to do in Food Gatherers, right? I mean, that just your inherent notion that businesses exist to serve the community, and here we are at Food Gatherers. So I think that's what's really a pleasure, right, about having that be your guiding force. But I think the connectedness also is more of a challenge as our organization has grown, and we have like 30 staff people. So internally, when I started, there were like 5 of us, and we were all in a room about the size of the bathroom. And, we all heard everyone and saw everything and did everything together, and we all had to know how to do everything. And as you, scale up, how do you create that, how do you preserve that culture of understanding the service piece? And so we work really hard to not have silos, I think, in the department, where, like, here's fundraising, and they don't know, they're just raising money, but they're just raising money for projects that have nothing to do with what, our programs people need, or our drivers are out in the road and, they don't know sort of what we're doing strategically in other ways. And I think that's really, the ongoing work for us. And I think we try to do it in lots of different ways. But, sharing meals together and trying to have a lot of communication between people and among people, and it's the expectation that anyone who starts in administration in any of those roles, the first thing they do is go to the community kitchen and serve a meal at the Delicatessen Center, or go on the truck with one of our drivers, and that's the first thing they do, and hopefully do it frequently, right, to be that. So I think that's really our challenge, is making sure that as we grow, that connectedness is there for our staff, and also just a feedback loop from the people that we're serving. And I'm looking at my friend Kathy out here, who's runs one of the pantries that we work with, and part of it's like just delivering the food every day. Like, our drivers interact with the people we're partnering with, and so there's other ways to do that work, or you could come to the building and et cetera, but that human touch and communication on a daily basis is really important.
Just to follow up on the as you talk about, as you scale up, and used to be, there was 5 of you in a room, and we started very small, and there's a lot of people that are with us, still with us when we started small, and then folks say, oh, we're going to lose that family feeling. So I just ask, how many of you grew up in a dysfunctional family? Is that the kind of feeling that you want at work? So it's not whether it's a family feeling or not, it's that, does the organization have these guiding principles that are, underpin all of its actions? and you can scale very large. It's as long as, and it's not that those principles are held. No one's going to say, you know, if you say, oh, our principle, be nice to each other, have integrity, tell the truth. No one's going to say, I don't believe in that. But it's, are they actionable? You know, are you behaving that way? And the other way for us to the connectedness is we practice what is called open book management, something we learned from a man named Jack Stack, who wrote a book called The Great Game of Business, and then a follow-up called A Stake in the Game. And that's how we really learned to, we wanted an organization where decisions were not made based on who had the most authority, but, you know, who had a great idea, who had information and data that was relevant to an issue at hand, who had a solution to a problem. And we wanted to drive decision making as widely and deeply in the organization as we could, and invite everybody to come in and help make those decisions that run the business, and to have everybody believe that they were personally responsible. And the system for doing that for us was open book management.
Great. What big ideas you're currently working with others to minimize social disparities and accelerate positive social change?
We have always wanted to, share ownership. So anybody that works for us can be, we have a very clear path to partnership, and you can become a partner in the organization. We have a hybrid form of employee ownership, and we're going to, you can purchase what we call community shares, and now we're going to come out, which are really, it's complicated, but and then also legacy shares, so you can own shares in the business and not have to, you can leave and still hold on to those shares, and we've been working for many years of constantly raising the entry-level wages that you start at, and providing a very clear path for how to make more money in the organization, and what that means. And then we are working very hard to become an anti-racist organization. We have a long way to go. I'd say back in 2008, looking around, if, we certainly were becoming more diverse in the workforce, but when you look at the ownership, it was white. And so we have given ourselves a mandate that we want the ownership, not the staff, but the ownership at a minimum to reflect the racial demographics of the county that we do business in. And we realize there's an enormous amount of work to do to dismantle white supremacy, to recognize, white privilege within the organization. We thought we were doing a good job, but if people are not coming to us and want to be part of it, then clearly we're not. They don't think it's an inclusive organization. And so, what work do we have to do internally to interrupt and dismantle, racism that is institutionalized? It's certainly in our institution too. And what are we gonna, what are we doing about that? And so we're working very diligently on that.
Big ideas. Well, we're full of big ideas. Our biggest idea is, healthy food for everyone, and that everyone should have access to that. And I know there's enough younger people in here in the room, but when you think of food banks, really got started in the late 70s and 80s, and a lot of the thought really was, let's, it was sort of equivalent to like distributing canned goods, right? Dry goods, canned goods, to pantries and soup kitchens and such. And we really have been on a journey to change that conversation, and that it's not just about your surplus food or your your canned goods, or it's about healthy food access for everyone, and that we've just been working really hard to make sure that, historically we've always measured our success. When we started, at least, we measured our success by pounds all the time. So, it was like we did 1 million pounds, and then we moved into this building, we did 2 million pounds, and and along the way, we just started thinking, like, what's in that pound? Like, we need to look at that. And so we needed to look at understanding, like, what's the nutritional value of those pounds, and what's the economic value of those pounds for the people that we're serving. And again, listening and learning and getting feedback when we talk to folks who are food insecure and struggling with that. We also learned that many of them, had much higher rates of diet-related illnesses, like heart disease and diabetes, and that we're like, we don't want to be part of that problem. We want to be part of that solution. And even though on some level, when you're measuring your outcomes, it's easier, like we could triple the amount of food that we distribute annually if we filled up our trucks with pop instead of kale. It just weighs more. But really shifting, and it was a shift that my board had to make, right? To be like, okay, our growth that you saw for all these years isn't poundage-wise, it's not going to be the same if we're moving to this. And so we add this other metric around. First it was 50%, and now we're at 60% of all the food that we procure and distribute to our neighbors is protein or produce. And that's hard to do in Michigan. It requires, because we're not growing all year round. And I'm looking at my favorite farmer. Hi, Jeremy. Someday we will be, but so that's been like it's like a momentous shift in food banking to be doing that, and it's ongoing work. And we could go on about this, but I would say the other, audacious idea is we want to make the issue of hunger and food security not just a charitable issue. We want to make it to be a public health issue, a pressing public health issue. This community alone in Washtenaw County, 1 in 7 people are food insecure. Folks really are shocked by that because they think of the wealth and the assets that we have, and all of that's true. And I'm frustrated that that's, in 20 years, that's still, of the work that I've been doing, that's still a reality. When we're supporting a food pantry on U of M's campus. Now we're seeing food insecurity touch populations that, new populations instead of being diminished. And we're not, as a charitable, no matter how ambitious I am about food gatherers, it's also dawned on me, we're not going to do this alone, that it really has to be anchor institutions like campuses, like hospitals, like, K through 12, educational institutions that are prioritizing this and addressing it. And that's part of our goal, really, is to both be raising awareness and connecting those institutions to policy work and other work, sort of pressuring them, I think. So we're going to be focused on that in the future.
I think one thing very unique about Zingerman's and food gatherers is your unique culture, the work culture. One of the challenges whenever there is a unique culture for a leader is how to socialize new employees into buying the vision or being part of the culture. So what are the challenges? How do you actually do that?
Well, by having very, very clear, well-documented, written expectations, by defining what the levels of excellence are in terms of product and behavior, behaving in that way yourself all the time, rewarding, recognizing the behavior that you want when it's there, and rewarding it, and and just driving that home all the time. It's not training is ongoing. It's not a quick fix. It's not a one-time shot. We're a learning and teaching organization. So when you become a supervisor and then a manager and then a partner, there are requirements that you are learning so many hours a year and that you are teaching so many hours a year. So that trying to get as many people in the organization certified to be teaching our classes. So we have a very, well thought out orientation to how we're going to do all that, and that we're, really focused on the culture and continuing to build the culture that we want. Every organization has a culture. And if it's not, driven in a purposeful way, it's going to emerge, and generally it emerges on the back dock where everybody's complaining about everybody, rather than in a way that you want, and there's no substitute. You have to behave in that way, and you have to have high expectations, and we don't have an enormous issue. People self-select out of the organization pretty quickly. It's not for everybody. They go, I didn't want to be that zingy, so, and that's fine. They want a job where they can read a book and, interact with somebody every, 23.5 minutes. But, so that's how we nurture it. We nurture it.
Eileen?
Yeah, well, I always think of that quote, what is it? Culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? That, if you can have these ambitious notions and these ambitious strategic plans, but if you don't have the culture of the organization to support it, it just doesn't make any difference. I mean, ditto to everything Paul said. I think, we've certainly tried to send our staff and to leadership trainings and such, but it's a struggle, as with turnover and just transition, and now that we're in our 30th year. But I think there's people, in a way it's easier for us because we are so mission driven that we're really catching most of, and when I think of our culture, it's staff is part of it, but our volunteers are a huge part of it. I mean, our volunteer to staff ratio is 30 staff to 7,000 volunteers. And so, one of the things that we do, if you've ever been to food gatherers, and, I'm wearing my orange carrot earrings, but, it doesn't look like most food bank warehouses. It's bright, it's positive, there's like natural light in the warehouse. There's choices we made to have it be a workplace that is very focused on getting the food out and moving efficiently, but there's an element of fun to it and spirit. We chose the carrot as our logo and brand for a number of reasons, but this was before orange was cool, right? 30 years ago,
or before orange wasn't cool.
Yeah, and it's just, it kind of has this perkiness to it that Lori always described it. Paul's wife, Lori Saginaw, was a huge part of our organization as well. But it's just a great image, and I think in some of our communication, although it's changed now with technology, but at the beginning we didn't use photographs. Like we used fun images, and we didn't want like a sad. And Mary and I would always joke about this. Like, we don't want a sad, kid's face on our donation envelope that we send to people. And it doesn't mean that there's childhood hunger doesn't exist or that it's not, intolerable. It's just that's not what keeps people coming to organization. They come because they feel they can make a difference. And so that's really that energy, I think, that we try to embody, and our staff are like so hardworking, and we don't close. I mean, our kitchen is open every day of the year in the Delana Center. I'm looking at Dave. I see my operations person in the back. And, during the last month, during these polar vortexes and snow and the schools closed every other week, or it seemed every other day, we were open. And that's part of our culture, is that we take our work very seriously, but we also try to have fun and make sure that everyone who comes in feels that they, as a volunteer or as a partner agency or as a food donor, that there's a role that they can play. And our success is really built on that people feel meaningful. They feel like their work and their contributions are meaningful.
Thank you. Now I'm going to open the floor for
good.
questions.
Thank God.
And Mary has the mic.
So my question's for Elaine. You had mentioned, it's like, is the glass half full or is it half empty?
Hold it.
The glass could
Hold
break.
it up.
Oh, well, oh,
Yeah.
wow. So the glass could break at any time. You're always kind of looking, okay, cool, we did that, but like, what's next and how are we going to prevent the next bad thing from happening?
Yeah.
And so I guess my question is, does that ever cause issues like with morale or motivation of the people around you? Like, they don't feel like they can actually celebrate anything? And like, if it has, how do you actually go about addressing that?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I'm looking at Mary's been a great co-thinker. It's more so like how I work internally. Like, I'm just like, oh, great, we got this award, let's keep going. So I do have to try not to project that out. And so I have learned, and I have to be conscious of expressing gratitude. I think I do it much better probably externally sometimes than I do internally with my leadership team, because I am like that. So it is something that I struggle with a little bit, and but it's just like I'm just driven to keep moving. So and sometimes when you start a capital campaign or you start these things, like as a leader, like I started that 5 years ago and we just finished it, but in my mind, like I finished it a while ago, sort of, and so that kind of disconnect between how you start things and how they finished. And so I have to be very mindful and appreciative and express gratitude and have some patience sometimes. Learn to be more patient with fixing things.
My question is kind of catered towards all the college kids, but I was just wondering if there was anything that you guys did in undergrad that really helped you get to where you are today.
I did a lot. I'm laughing at Paul. A lot in undergrad. Well, I just sucked everything up that I could, right? I just went to every free thing and every, I was first generation in my family to go to college. And so to me, it was this I loved everything about it. And I was one of those people when you only had when being full-time was 18 credits, but you could take up to 18 credits, but most students would take 12. I would be the one that would take 18 credits, so I just did everything, but also just got really engaged in social activism on campus. I learned so much from running campaigns as a student, and I just think those skills are really great. And you can taste a lot of different things on campus, and that's harder to do later in life, right? There's so much, and so I would just eat it all up and go to all the great theater events here and just do everything that you can, and learn to write. Paul? Go to class.
I had a undergraduate career that you wouldn't want to, mimic, but I would say, there's always that kid that when he was, 4 years old, you knew he was going to be an investment banker or something. But I would, if I could do it over again, be curious. And take a lot of different, you're young and you don't have to really know what you're going to do. I encouraged my boys, not to go to college right away and to take time off. They didn't listen, and so one of them went for a year and a semester, and the other one went for 3 months, and before they dropped out. And it would have been cheaper if they had. I would, just. I don't work. I'm in an industry where it's very easy to get into. That's why everybody opens a restaurant. You don't need a degree. You don't, but it's extremely hard business to be in, and the people that do well are folks that had more of a liberal arts education and really did, they can take a lot of different subject matter and they can assimilate it together and they, so, when you're trying to problem solve, you're using examples from, literature, science, everything, and don't be in such a hurry. And, but I mean, it's easy to say if you're building a lot of debt as you're a student, I would start to question the return on investment, that it really affords you. But anyway, take advantage of where you are and hang out with people that are going somewhere. Hang out with people that have, positive vibrational energy, that have, ideas and not just complaints. Find a mentor.
Hey, so you mentioned that businesses shouldn't exist to make money, instead to strive for excellence, like in the community.
I was, they edited it. Businesses don't exist solely to create wealth for its shareholders, and that they are. Well, I'm sorry. What's the question?
Well, I was wondering, like, excellence is like a very abstract concept, and you mentioned that you had like retreats to like define exactly what that is. So I was wondering the process of like, how do you go around like defining excellence, particularly
Sure.
as it like applies to like.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's where when we talk about guiding principles, they're important in two areas. They're going to define the levels of excellence that we want everyone striving for, and they're going to describe the relationships that we're going to have with each other. And so we have three bottom lines: great food, great service, and great finance. And we have measurements on all of those. So great service, we have systems for those, and the systems are the tools that help us achieve the levels we want. So when we say, we want you to be a great service provider, there's 3 steps to great service. And if you are performing those 3 steps, you're a great service provider. It's not my opinion, but by definition in this organization, you're doing your job. So we try to be very, very clear what it is. We believe everybody wants to do a good job, but it has to be very clear what doing a good job looks like. So, but I did, in that quote, it was that they don't exist solely for the benefit of the shareholders. That it has to benefit everyone. You earn your right to do business in a community by being a good corporate citizen. And businesses, we're not a nation of farmers and merchants. Businesses are institutions that can have enormous impact, positive or negative, in a community, and we need to pay attention to that. And they should exist to provide people with a decent life, with meaningful work, a sense of community, and in a way to in a means by which to meet your needs. Okay.
So both of your organizations sort of started from a very large idea
and I know visioning is something that's really important. So can you kind of talk about how you took a very large idea, like obviously Zingerman started as a deli and now has so many different businesses. So how did you have this abstract view and break it into like operational steps?
So, really when we opened, we wanted, like Mary said, we wanted a great sandwich and an organization with soul. We wanted to meet payroll. We wanted to stay in business. And then as you go along, you start to experience some success, and you get a bit bolder, and so we were going along, and it was exhilarating. And sales were going up, and we were profitable, and people were having a wonderful time. And then, sales started to flatten out, and profitability was going down. And there were things that were bothering me that in the workplace that we were, we now had a formal leadership team. We're 8-9 years into it, and there's a lot of disagreement about, where's our opportunities? How do we take advantage of them? And where are the threats coming from? How do we mitigate those? There's a lot of risk avoidance. We're Zingermans, we're cool, everybody writes about us, let's not do anything crazy. And I felt we were becoming bureaucratic, and that the leadership started to believe that their authority was vested in their title. And I wanted an organization where the people working there willingly gave the authority to the people that were leading, because they viewed them as fair and consistent and committed to their success. And you really wanted to shake things up. And I took Ari and I sat him down, and I said, we've been at this for 10 years. What do we look like? And he's like, why are you bothering me? I got work to do. This is our work. No, the dishwasher called in sick, the cooler's broke, and the lunch rush is going to start. And I said, yeah, the pressures are very, very real every day. I believe that, but somebody in the organization has to be looking down the road, saying this is where we're going and it's going to be great. It's a debt. When people work for you and they come in and they do, this incredible effort out for you, that's a gift. And in return, you owe those folks a debt. Part of that debt is a workplace where people feel good about coming and putting out that effort. Part of it is having a legacy, a guiding principle, saying this is how we're going to behave without exception. And then a really big part of it is an inclusive, hopeful, inspiring, strategically sound vision of the future, saying this is where we're going, it's going to be great, and you can pick your role that you want to play in it. And so we started this conversation that took us about a year. How would we grow but remain true to this vision of not expanding? Certainly that's a great business model. And we realized we like being owners. We wanted to provide the opportunity for ownership. If we were opening more businesses, then there's more room for supervisors and managers. We could be customers and suppliers of each other, and we could stay in the community. So it was thought out. We didn't have a roadmap. We couldn't turn to any place, any organization that was doing it in that way, and our trusted advisors, lawyers, accountants, bankers, they all said, you're crazy. You're giving the store away. Say, well, we're not giving away. We're asking people to participate in something that didn't exist yet. That's a long-winded answer.
I would just add briefly that strategic planning is really key, and I think we at Food Gatherers have always had a plan. Sometimes it's better spelled out. So it could be 5 to 10 years. It's not necessarily annual plans so much, but to be able to articulate that vision. And we have been, we have fulfilled that each time. But to do that work, like that goes into that, is really the hard work. And so, having a really helpful person outside your organization come in and do that with you, but also be key to involve not just staff, but the people you're serving, in our case, our partners, our food donors. And the hard part is the people you're not serving, right? Like learning from them. And so that's really that work. And I think that's your listening part, right? That's your listening and learning and adapting. So I think having it be written and in our case, compelling, to folks both who are funding you and the folks who are building the organization is the key piece. So, and actually Zingerman's has great resources on creating your own sort of personal vision and strategic planning that I would recommend too.
Yeah, if you go to the zingtrain.com website, there's a downloadable area, and there's articles on visioning. There's a lot of good information there that's free.
We have time for one last question. And if not, then let's give our speakers gratitude.
There's one more.
Oh, there is one. Okay, thank you.
I don't think he got that in under the gavel.
Hi there.
No, I just wanted to, I think, point out that from my interactions with your organizations, you both have a really high level of integrity and a super high level of commitment. And Eileen kind of pointed this out, like having people go along with drivers to onboarding people in a way that makes sure that no matter if they're going to work for you for a month at mail order or wherever, that they really get what's going on. And I think I've never worked for either of you, but I've experienced very few organizations that spend the time and attention to onboarding people in a way to make sure that culture piece is functioning. And so I just wanted to give out those props to you. But my question is, given that there's all those drivers for social inequity that are kind of on some level undermining the core values that in different ways both of you have at the heart of your missions, what do you think are the possible future out-of-the-box levers for private companies and public partnerships or other things like that that would help address in a more core way the inequities that we have in our society that drive the need for food rescue and food access?
Oh, great, Jeremy. Ask us like the most difficult question for the last minute. No, I'm teasing.
I mean, that's what I do.
Yeah. How do we fix the social determinants of poverty?
Or just like,
yeah.
I don't
expect you to have that at the end.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say for food gatherers, and I know Jeremy well from some of the work that we've tried to do with local growers, and we're part of a food system. We are a reflection of a food system, and we're a reflection of a wacky food system, right? That overproduces so much food that could go to waste in a country where people go to bed hungry. And so that's the fundamental contradiction that led to our creation and our persistence. And so part of it is embracing those contradictions, right? That we are, at least this is the part that I struggle with, that we are, a reflection of that. And you have to, what is that? The sign of intelligence is having two contradictory thoughts in your head at the same time. Like, we are so emblematic of that. And that, there's many better ways to fight poverty than what we do in terms of like the labor piece of it and all. And so I think that's the part that I always play with more, like just embracing that fundamental contradiction of how do you bring light when there's darkness. And, that's to me kind of what food rescue does, but it's still, indicative of a bigger problem, right? And I don't know the answer, but I also think that that is part of the, at this age, and your question earlier around capitalism and, how for-profit businesses can do this. I mean, those are the inherent contradictions we have to work with, right? Like, how do we embody this work when it's so fraught with contradictions?
From the commerce end, we focus more locally. on what, we're not going to solve large problems. We can try to be a model. So we try to be a model business that you can behave this way, and you can treat people this fairly and your customers fairly, and still stay in business, but and then try to promote a vibrant local economy. So we buy from local producers. A dollar, if you go out and instead of spending $1 in Whole Foods or a big box store, you're buying from locally owned businesses, a much larger portion of that dollar stays in the community, and you start to build vibrancy within the community. It's a small, just moving to 10% of, if you're buying your services and your products locally, if a 10% of that is local, has an enormous impact on a community, and begins to lift that community up. So we try to do that. 10% of all of our profit is donated back at a minimum to the nonprofit sector every year, and we try to encourage other businesses to do that. And 5% of all of our profit goes into a fund that we call the Community Chest, and that's an emergency relief fund for our employees that are experiencing a financial crisis. So we're doing that. We're, employee ownership, constantly trying to move the entry-level wages up, and to, be a model, and hope other businesses start to follow. Especially like with buying locally, from suppliers locally, not doing that and marketing that as a strategic differentiator, because then we're not moving the needle at all. It's trying to get all of our competitors to do it too, so that everybody's doing it, and that's how the community improves.
Thank you so much. Can we show some gratitude to our speakers?
Thank you. Thank you, dear.